Welcome to this deep dive, where we take a focused stack of materials, all kinds of research and scriptural notes, and really try to condense them into essential knowledge, tailored specifically for you.
That's right. And today our mission is very laser focused.
It really is. We're looking at one of the most foundational, concise, and I would say theologically profound passages in all of Scripture.
Psalm chapter 14.
Exactly.
And we're really embarking on a detailed teaching exploration here. This is based on a commentary series that was created by the You Need Faith in Jesus team.
And their whole goal, and our goal today, is to move way past the idea that this is just, ancient poetry.
Right. We are treating this psalm as a divine, airtight indictment of the human condition, and really the absolute necessity of God's intervention.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, Psalm chapter 14 is short, right? It's only 7 verses, but it acts as this critical theological hinge.
It really does.
Our sources confirm that, understanding this psalm is just indispensable for grasping the New Testament's framework for sin and salvation.
Which is why we're going to meticulously examine every single verse. The goal here is to fully grasp the universal verdict David issues, and then the glorious hope for deliverance that anchors the whole text.
Yeah, this discussion is very much teaching-focused. It's designed to deliver foundational truths, practical insights, things that go beyond just academic study and actually impact your spiritual understanding.
We really want you to see how David's ancient words establish a truth that the Apostle Paul later uses to save the world.
Okay, let's unpack this pivotal text. We're going to begin, as David does, with the problem. And that starts with the devastating declaration made about the individual at the heart of the rebellion, the fool. So we begin with what our sources call the root of all willful sinfulness. And it's defined immediately right there in the very first verse. We are reading from the King James Version, which renders this declaration so powerfully.
Yes, it says,
"The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good." That's Psalm chapter 14, verse 1.
And what's immediately fascinating here, and what the commentary just emphasizes again and again, is the precise scriptural definition of the fool.
Right, because when we hear that word in modern English, we think of, a lack of intelligence, someone who is silly.
Exactly. But the Hebrew word here is nabal, and nabal is, it's not about low IQ, it's about a moral and spiritual vacancy.
So it's a definition based purely on rebellion, isn't it?
That's it.
The sources point out that a person could be a genius in the world's estimation, a brilliant scientist, a successful entrepreneur, and still fit David's description of Nabal perfectly.
Absolutely. The essence of Nabal is this moral depravity that stems from a willful, chosen rejection of God's authority, his sovereign rule. And the way David structures it is so crucial.
The fool hath said in his heart.
In his heart, not necessarily with his mouth.
Let's focus on that phrase, because that's the real insight here. It doesn't mean shouting atheism from a rooftop.
No.
It defines a person's inner conviction, their settled worldview, regardless of what they say publicly.
Yes. And the commentary refers to this concept as practical atheism. And that is a critical distinction to make.
So an intellectual atheist denies God's existence with his mouth.
Right. But a practical atheist, this person might even attend church. They might profess belief with their lips. But fundamentally, they operate their life every single day as if God were completely irrelevant.
Or non-existent, or just powerless to interfere.
Exactly. They are their own ultimate authority. So that internal conviction, what's said in the heart, dictates every single external action, even if the lips never speak the denial out loud.
So the Nabal is someone who, at the most fundamental level of their being, has just dismissed the reality of any divine accountability. They've cut the ultimate moral cord.
And the verse immediately pivots to the consequences. The horrifying consequences of this internal act of treason.
That internal rebellion cannot be contained, can it? It just spills out immediately.
Right into the next phrase. The verse continues, "They are corrupt, they have done abominable works." It's cause and effect.
When you deny the existence or the authority of the standard setter,
You destroy your own standard. There's nothing left.
the word corrupt here is really powerful. It implies spoiling or putrefaction. It's the opposite of integrity.
It's the image of something created good that has turned sour or bad, like spoiled wine
Right.
or milk.
And that's the visual the sources really want us to grasp. The human being was created to reflect God's goodness, but this choice of practical atheism, this heart declaration that there is no God, it pollutes the original design.
And that corruption leads directly to abominable works. These aren't just mistakes. These are detestable, wicked acts acts that cause revulsion in the presence of true holiness.
And then David delivers this sweeping, absolutely devastating final verdict in that verse.
This is the hammer blow.
There's none that doeth good.
It is an absolute statement, and the source commentary emphasizes that this is God's perspective on human merit, from his viewpoint.
So human works, even if they look charitable or, beneficial in a social context,
Are fundamentally flawed. They fall short of God's perfect, holy standard if they come from a heart that has rejected his primary authority.
if the root is corruption, if the root is Nabal,
The fruit cannot be true, lasting good. It's impossible.
this universal verdict is so central. And this is precisely where the Psalm's authority just explodes beyond the Old Testament.
Yeah.
For you, the listener, to really understand the magnitude of this statement, we have to connect it to the New Testament.
Absolutely, to Paul's use of this exact passage.
Right.
The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 3, he doesn't invent the doctrine of universal sinfulness. He's not coming up with something new. He finds its solid foundation right here in Psalm 14.
He's building his case.
He's building his case that the entire world, Jew and Gentile, everyone on earth, is under the power of sin, and the primary evidence he uses comes directly from David's divine assessment.
Paul is proving that humanity is guilty before God, not based on, failing to follow a ritual, but based on his intrinsic corruption that's traced all the way back to the heart.
Exactly. When you read Romans chapter 3, Paul is linking these Old Testament statements together, one after another, to show that God, through David, already rendered the verdict centuries before.
And he quotes this.
Specifically, he cites this truth when he writes in Romans chapter 3, verse 10, "As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one."
So David's declaration that there is none that doeth good provides the theological, the historical, and the prophetic justification for Paul's universal claim of guilt.
And the insight here is vital. If even our best intentions, our most outwardly ethical behavior still fails to meet the standard of divine goodness because it comes from a heart denying God's rule,
Then salvation has to be entirely exogenous. It has
Yeah.
to come from outside of us.
precisely, the starting point for living a life that God deems righteous is the active daily rejection of that essence of foolishness, of practical atheism. It's acknowledging in your heart that he is God, he is king, and only his standard matters.
And this profound theological truth that we are all equally guilty, that's what makes the final deliverance in this song so miraculous.
It really is.
So if the foolish person is harboring this rebellious, corrupting conviction deep in their heart, what's the divine response? Is God just silent, distant?
Not at all. And verse 2 paints this incredible picture of divine scrutiny. It says,
The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. That's Psalm chapter 14, verse 2.
this image just completely counters the fool's assumption. The Nabal lives as if God is absent, but this verse shows God is intensely present and active.
The Lord looked down from heaven. That implies a searching, a kind of auditing, a personal investigation into the state of humanity.
He is not a distant, indifferent deity. He is personally engaged with the moral state of his creation. It's an active verb, An intense spiritual census is being taken.
And he isn't looking for obedience to a checklist of rules. He's looking for two foundational qualities that define a true relationship.
Yes, he is searching for anyone who did understand and seek God.
Let's break that down. Understand.
This understanding is spiritual discernment. It's about recognizing God's authority, his holiness, his truth. And the seeking is an active posture. It's a posture of dependence and relationship.
And the fact that God is searching reveals his heart, doesn't it? He desires fellowship, not destruction. He is looking for a remnant, for just a small sign of spiritual life among the children of men.
And our sources connect this moment of divine search back to recurring points in biblical history. It suggests this kind of assessment is a pattern that happens when human corruption becomes, pervasive.
That's a crucial connection. It's not a one-time thing.
No, we see a powerful parallel right at the beginning of human history, detailing the conditions that led to the flood. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually."
That's an incredible statement.
It is, and the search described in Psalm 14 is a similar divine audit. It confirms that the internal corruption of the heart, that Nabal mindset, leads to a global condition of pervasive evil.
So God conducts the audit. He searches the entirety of the human race, looking for genuine spiritual understanding, for desire for a relationship. And now we come to the heartbreaking universal verdict of that search, delivered in verse 3.
It says, They are all gone aside, they are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Psalm chapter 14, verse 3.
This is just devastating.
It's the conclusion. And David repeats the truth emphatically to ensure there is absolutely no misunderstanding about the scope of human failure. This verdict is universal. It's absolute. It levels the playing field and shatters any possibility of human pride or self-merit.
Let's delve into the specific language used here. It starts with, they are all gone aside.
That phrase, gone aside, uses language that suggests a deviation from a prescribed path. Imagine a road, clearly marked by God, that leads to righteousness.
Okay.
Every single person has taken a detour. Every person has willfully wandered off that path. It's a theological term for human straying, for sin, for missing the mark.
And the second phrase is just as powerful. They are altogether become filthy. This reinforces the corruption from verse 1.
The term translated here as filthy or corrupt is really strong. It suggests a moral stench, a putrefaction. It means they are rotten, utterly spoiled.
And the sources note that this imagery underscores that sin isn't just a behavior.
No, it is a profound internal state. Humanity is not just wounded or bruised. We've been fundamentally ruined by the Nabal's denial of God. We are spiritually bankrupt.
And once again, that repetition. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. It serves as the final conclusive statement. Why is that repetition so theologically important?
It's so important because we as humans constantly try to find exceptions. We always want to say, well, maybe I'm not as bad as that person, or my good deeds outweigh my bad ones.
Right. We grade on a curve.
Exactly. And the divine assessment shuts down every single avenue for comparison or self-justification. The addition of no, not one makes the universality of the verdict completely undeniable.
It means that without divine intervention, all of us stand condemned by our own internal condition.
And that is the cornerstone of the gospel. If even one person could achieve goodness on their own, the cross would be optional for them.
And that universality is exactly what the New Testament confirms again. Paul makes sure that nobody misses this point.
Precisely. We have to anchor this truth again to that clear and undeniable confirmation in the New Testament, which applies this verdict across all boundaries. Romans chapter 3, verse 23 declares, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God."
So Psalm 14 provides the Old Testament evidence that this is the unchanging reality of humanity, the knowledge of universal guilt. It's painful, but it's necessary.
And that leads us to the crucial practical takeaway of this verdict. Instead of sinking into despair over our failure, this truth should actually elevate our sense of gratitude.
That's the proper response.
It is. The truth that there is none that doeth good should lead you, the listener, to profound gratitude for God's grace. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that salvation cannot be earned. Not through works, or merit, or piety, or your heritage.
Because no one is good enough on their own?
No one. So our hope has to be placed entirely in the perfection and the sacrifice and the provision of Jesus Christ. This psalm removes any possibility of self-salvation. It compels us to rely solely on the radical, transforming gift of God's mercy.
So after establishing this fundamental corruption of the human heart, the psalmist then shifts his focus. He goes from the internal conviction to the external, tangible results.
Yes, and David expresses this kind of shocked disbelief at the casual cruelty that stems from this deep-seated moral failure in verse 4.
It says, "Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread, and call not upon the Lord." That's Psalm chapter 14, verse 4.
The first phrase is a rhetorical question. You can almost hear David's astonishment. Do they truly have no knowledge? And again, it's not a question about IQ. It implies a willful ignorance, a deliberate, chosen blindness to the spiritual and moral consequences of their actions.
The workers of iniquity. These are people whose lives are defined by actively practicing lawlessness and rebellion against God. It's their daily routine.
Right. And this willful ignorance leads to one of the most startling and frankly disturbing metaphors in the entire psalm. David says, "They eat up my people as they eat bread."
That is a horrific image. But its power is in its simplicity.
It is. It suggests that the oppression, the exploitation, the destruction they inflict on God's people, it's not a moment of passionate rage.
It's just routine. It's casual, like something necessary to sustain life, done without a second thought, without remorse. The sources talk about this being the banality of evil.
Exactly. The imagery is of thoughtless consumption. When you eat bread, you don't agonize over the morality of the act. It's a standard, necessary part of your day. For the workers of iniquity, oppressing the poor or harming God's people becomes just as standard, just as routine. and just as casual.
And this reveals a heart so hardened by foolishness that cruelty has become normalized. It's just integrated into their daily life.
And this kind of graphic cruelty against the humble and God's people is a consistent marker of godlessness throughout Scripture. It is not an isolated incident.
We see this pattern repeated across the prophets, don't we?
All the time. The sources draw a really strong parallel to the prophet Micah, who uses equally graphic language to describe the oppressive leaders of his time. In Micah chapter 3, verse 3, the prophet rails against those who also eat the flesh of my people and flay their skin from off them.
It's the same consuming imagery.
The same. It reinforces that when God's moral structure is rejected, the resulting lawlessness is characterized by this predatory, consuming injustice against the innocent.
And the psalmist then moves from describing the horrific symptom, the cruelty, to pinpointing the simple, singular source of this moral decay.
And the diagnosis is profoundly simple.
And call not upon the Lord.
That's it. This connects back perfectly to the fool in verse 1. If you deny God's authority in your heart, you certainly aren't going to call upon him for guidance or restraint or help.
It makes perfect sense. Their refusal to acknowledge God in their actions, to depend on him, or to appeal to his standards in prayer is what ultimately frees them to commit such casual wickedness.
Right. If you don't call upon the Lord, you lose the great diagnostic tool.
A sensitive conscience.
Exactly. There's no check on your behavior. The act of prayer, of constantly calling upon the Lord, keeps us tethered to reality. It's an acknowledgement of our dependence and his sovereignty.
The person who refuses to pray essentially says, I can handle this life, including all my moral choices, without any divine intervention.
And that refusal to depend on God is the spiritual license that leads to moral collapse. And eventually, to treating other human beings like something you just consume daily.
So the practical takeaway here is absolutely essential for our daily walk, a prayerful life. It's not just a devotional exercise, it's a necessary preventative measure.
Absolutely. When the sources instruct us to look for the practical takeaways, this is paramount. Your active, consistent dependence on God through prayer is the greatest defense against the kind of casual sinfulness that defines the foolish.
If you're regularly seeking God's input and dependence.
Yeah. You cannot simultaneously live in willful, arrogant rebellion against him. It ensures your conscience remains sensitive and it guides you away from consuming others through exploitation or casual cruelty.
We now hit a really dramatic pivot point in the psalm. The first 4 verses have been describing this widespread, unchallenged arrogance of the wicked. But here, in verse 5, the entire scenario just flips.
Yes. Suddenly the tables turn on the oppressors, it says.
There were they in great fear, for God is in the generation of the righteous. Psalm chapter 14, verse 5.
This abrupt change of scene implies an immediate supernatural intervention. What caused this great fear? It wasn't a sudden defeat on the battlefield or a financial collapse.
No, it's something else.
It was the sudden, terrifying realization of a spiritual truth they had actively suppressed their whole lives. God is actively present with his people.
Their entire worldview, the belief that there is no God or that God is irrelevant, it just shatters in an instant.
All their confidence, which was built on worldly power and the presumption of God's absence, it just dissolves when confronted with his active reality.
And the sources affirm that the phrase, God is in the generation of the righteous, is a declaration of presence and solidarity.
Yes, and this presence is the source of 2 opposite effects. For the believer, the generation of the righteous, it's unshakable comfort and security. But for the wicked, it is a terrifying revelation of judgment.
They suddenly realize the true power is residing among the very people they mocked and oppressed.
And their bravado is exposed as paper thin.
Let's clarify the generation of the righteous, because that's distinct from the children of men in verse 2. How do the sources define this specific group?
Well, the generation of the righteous is not defined by merit, because we've already established there is none that doeth good. It's defined by association and by faith. There are those who, despite their failings, acknowledge God as king and have taken refuge in him.
So they are the covenant people, set apart.
Yes, defined by God's choice to reside among them and protect them. Their righteousness is imputed and relational, not earned. And the wicked suddenly see that the foundation they thought was sand is, in fact, the rock of God's active commitment.
And this assurance of God's active presence remains the hallmark of God's covenant with his people, extending right through to the New Testament age.
Absolutely. The final ultimate affirmation of God's unbreakable promise of presence is found in the New Testament. When the resurrected Christ gives the Great Commission in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20.
He says, "And lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen."
And this promise, which brings terror to the wicked in Psalm 14, provides eternal courage to the believer today.
David then addresses the wicked directly in verse 6, and he exposes the utter folly of their pride and their judgment errors.
He does. The verse says, "Ye have shamed the counsel of the poor, because the Lord is his refuge." Psalm chapter 14, verse 6.
So David reveals the core conflict. The wicked had routinely mocked the counsel of the poor.
And the poor here represents the humble, the afflicted, those lacking worldly resources or political influence. Their counsel, their life strategy was simple: dependence on God. They chose faith over worldly might.
And to the powerful workers of iniquity, that reliance on an unseen God must have looked utterly idiotic, weak, especially compared to reliance on military strength or accumulated wealth.
Precisely. The wicked saw the humility and dependence of the righteous as a source of shame. They taunted them for putting their trust in an invisible refuge instead of leveraging earthly resources.
But the final clause of the verse, because the Lord is his refuge, it flips the entire accusation on its head.
It does. The simple faith of the humble is not a weakness. It is their greatest, most secure position. Their counsel was, in fact, the wisest strategy possible.
So this simple faith, this act of finding refuge in God, is actually the source of the great fear that strikes the wicked in the previous verse.
Yes. They realize the foolishness they mocked is actually the ultimate power source. The contrast is startling. The wicked thought they had knowledge back in verse 4, but it was willful ignorance. The humble were dismissed as ignorant, but their counsel was true wisdom.
And this links directly to that New Testament theme that God often uses the things the world dismisses to achieve his greatest victories.
It does. The sources strongly connect this to the Apostle Paul's instruction in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27. Paul writes, "But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty."
So David sees the wicked mocking the humble for relying on God.
And Paul confirms that this very reliance, this perceived foolishness, is the tool God uses to dismantle the arrogance and wisdom of the world. The strategy of the humble is revealed as the only strategy that survives the divine audit.
This means the practical takeaway here should provide immense courage and stability for you, the listener, when you're facing opposition or mockery for your faith.
Your courage should be anchored in this promise. When the world tries to shame you, when they mock your dependence on the Bible, or your simple decision to place your trust in the Lord rather than fleeting power or wealth, remember this verse.
Your dependence on God is not a point of shame or weakness.
It is your greatest, most secure, and unshakable security. When the worldly wisdom of the wicked shatters in great fear, your refuge in the Lord remains firm and unthreatened.
The psalm then concludes with this beautiful, heartfelt cry. It moves from the present reality of wickedness and oppression to the fervent hope for ultimate deliverance.
Yes, David closes the psalm by looking forward to God's complete and final victory in verse 7.
It says, "Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion. When the Lord bringeth back the captivity of his people, Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad." That's Psalm chapter 14, verse 7.
This is such a powerful, prayerful expression of longing. That phrase, "oh, that," in Hebrew, it's meyetin. It conveys this intense desire, a passionate yearning for something that has not yet happened.
It's the yearning of the righteous who are just weary of living amidst the constant oppression of the wicked.
Yes, and he's crying out for God's full salvation to manifest, and crucially, for it to come out of Zion.
Zion, of course, being God's dwelling place, the physical location of his presence and his sovereignty.
That's the key theological point.
Yeah.
The salvation David longs for must come directly from God, from his established authority. No earthly king, no political movement, no human effort can generate this deliverance.
It has to be initiated by God himself, flowing forth from the place where he dwells.
It defines the nature of true rescue. It is divine, not human.
And the phrase, "when the Lord bringeth back the captivity of his people," that carries a profound meaning that goes beyond just a literal physical exile.
It absolutely does. While it certainly applied to historical exiles, the sources emphasize that the deeper meaning relates to the total deliverance from the bondage of sin, of oppression, and all the consequences of the fool's worldview.
It's the ultimate redemption.
It is. A time when the injustice described back in verse 4 is finally reversed and banished forever. It's the restoration of the covenant relationship to its intended perfect state.
So this is the ultimate hope, a future day of total restoration and the complete vindication of the righteous. And the immediate result of this salvation is, well, it's palpable.
Yes. When this final salvation comes, the result is pure, collective spiritual joy. Jacob shall rejoice and Israel shall be glad. This isn't just temporary relief. This is permanent spiritual gladness that arises from witnessing God's full justice and mercy finally established.
And using the two names, Jacob and Israel, that emphasizes the complete reconciliation and fulfillment for all of God's covenant people.
It does. And David's ancient longing for deliverance out of Zion finds its most direct and undeniable fulfillment in Jesus Christ.
The sources highlight this crucial moment of fulfillment. The greatest moment of salvation coming out of Zion occurred with the incarnation.
It did when Simeon, a righteous man filled with the Holy Spirit, saw the baby Jesus brought to the temple. He holds the child and he declares the Old Testament hope realized. That's in Luke chapter 2, verse 30. He says, "For mine eyes have seen thy salvation."
So Jesus is the physical embodiment of the salvation of Israel that David fervently longed for.
He is.
So even though we are saved now through Christ, we still feel that tension. We still live in a world defined by practical atheism, where the wicked still eat up God's people as bread. How does this final verse speak to us today, living in that tension?
Well, this is the crux of Christian living in the present age, isn't it? We have received the initial saving work of Christ, but we await the completed work, the final establishment of his kingdom. This final verse voices our continuing, fervent longing for the blessed hope Christ's return and the final resurrection. This future hope gives us the strength to endure the oppression of the present world, knowing that the final day of rejoicing is absolutely guaranteed by the King. The full deliverance is coming.
And that brings us to a final provocative thought that really ties the whole narrative arc of Psalm 14 together, moving from that initial assessment to the ultimate hope.
The theological thread woven throughout this psalm is profoundly important. The universal verdict of Psalm 14 that there is none that doeth good, no, not one. That is the essential truth that makes the final promise of deliverance out of Zion so precious.
If we could save ourselves.
Right. If we could, the final rejoicing would be a celebration of human effort. But humanity's universal failure ensures that God's universal salvation is entirely a gift of grace. The guarantee of complete gladness is fixed solely on the provision and authority of the King, who is the ultimate refuge.
That was an incredibly clarifying and deep examination of Psalm 14, moving from the definition of foolishness all the way to the certainty of future joy. For you, the listener, we've drawn out two essential practical steps from this powerful teaching.
The first practical step, drawn from that opening verse, is diagnostic. It's crucial for your personal integrity. And it's this: examine your heart daily for the essence of the fool.
You must actively check to ensure you acknowledge God's authority.
Right. Ask yourself, do you live in a state of practical atheism, operating as if God is not in all his thoughts? Or do you consciously submit your plans and your actions to his standard? True wisdom starts with the daily, conscious acknowledgement of God as sovereign king.
And the second step, drawn from the central section of the psalm, provides stability and courage in a really unstable world. Trust the refuge, unashamedly.
If you feel afflicted, or humble, or weak, your primary strategy, your counsel, must be singular and unwavering. The Lord is your refuge. You must depend on God daily for your security, relying on his unfailing presence rather than any temporary worldly confidence that is destined to shatter when confronted with God's reality.
The ultimate truth distilled from this entire psalm is clear. You cannot achieve righteousness on your own merits. Your starting status is determined by the universal verdict of human failure.
However, through simple faith in the salvation that comes from God, you are counted among the generation of the righteous where God is actively present, providing refuge. And you await the glorious day of complete rejoicing promised out of Zion.
We really hope this in-depth exploration of Psalm chapter 14, guided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team sources, has equipped you with clarity, with courage, and a deeper insight into the foundational truths of your spiritual walk.
And to solidify your understanding of this lesson, be sure to use the flashcards to review key terms and concepts, and then take the quiz. Passing the quiz will mark this lesson as complete in your study plan.
Thank you for joining us for this in-depth teaching exploration into the sources. Until next time.